He hadn't seen her in over 20 years. Back then, she was the only one who believed in him, when he was just a starving boy with torn shoes and empty pockets. Now he was a billionaire, and she was standing in the rain, shivering, begging for bread. What he did next left the whole city speechless. Sleek black SUV, David Martin's, one of the country's youngest billionaires, gripped the steering wheel with an impatient sigh. He wasn't used to driving himself, but tonight had been different. He had left the office late, dismissing his driver, telling himself he wanted the peace of solitude. Yet now, with his car shuddering and the wipers squeaking furiously against the windshield, solitude felt more like punishment. The engine coughed. The lights flickered. And then, silence. His SUV came to a reluctant halt at the side of the drenched, dimly lit road. David cursed under his breath. Of all the places to break down, why here? The area was known for its chaotic traffic, and mechanics weren't exactly a phone call away. He reached for his phone, only to discover the signal was weak, the screen damp with rain that had crept in through the open window. As he sat there, wondering what to do next, his eyes caught a small figure across the road. There, huddled under a torn umbrella, was a woman selling bread. Her stall was nothing more than a rickety wooden table covered with a faded nylon sheet. Raindrops splattered on the loaves as she tried desperately to shield them, her clothes drenched, her face pale under the flickering streetlight. Something about her tugged at his memory. The way she moved, the tilt of her head, the resilience in her posture even as the storm battered her. For a moment, he shook his head. No, it couldn't be. But then, the wind blew aside the umbrella just long enough for him to see her face clearly. Wrinkled now, tired, but unmistakable. His chest tightened. His heartbeat thundered louder than the rain. It was Madame Grace. The name crashed into his mind like lightning splitting the night. His old teacher. The woman who had once stood at the front of a dusty classroom, chalk in hand, fire in her eyes, holding together the dreams of children too poor to believe in tomorrow. He blinked again, almost refusing to believe it. The last time he had seen her, she was in her 40s, vibrant, commanding, unshakable. The kind of teacher who could silence an entire room of rowdy teenagers with just a look. The one who had pushed him, believed in him, and, most importantly, saved him when he was about to give up on school. And now? Here she was, reduced to selling bread on the roadside in a storm. David swallowed hard. A billion thoughts collided in his mind. How did she get here? Where was her family? How had life dealt her such a cruel hand? The billionaire in him wanted to analyze, calculate, make sense of the situation. But the boy in him, the hungry, desperate boy who had once sat in her classroom, felt something else entirely: guilt. The rain hammered louder as he stepped out of his car. Water soaked his tailored suit instantly, plastering it against his frame, but he didn't care. He crossed the road, dodging puddles, his shoes splashing mud with each step. Madame Grace was too busy fending off the rain to notice him at first. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to balance the umbrella and shield the bread. Her face bore lines of hardship, her lips pressed into a thin, weary line. Madame Grace? His voice was low at first, uncertain, almost afraid that saying her name aloud would shatter the fragile memory. She looked up. Her eyes, once sharp, commanding, the eyes that could pierce through the mischief of a classroom full of boys, were clouded now, tired, struggling to place the face before her. Yes? Do I know you? Her voice cracked with fatigue, but there was still that familiar tone of dignity, even in suffering. David's throat tightened. For a moment, he couldn't find the words. He wanted to scream, "It's me. The boy you saved. The one you refused to let fail." But the lump in his throat betrayed him. "It's me. David. David Martins. From St. Michael's Secondary School. You taught me." Her eyes widened slightly. She squinted, studying him more closely, and then, like the slow rising of dawn, recognition flickered across her face. "David?" she whispered. "Little David? Always sitting in the back row? Always borrowing extra chalk to practice sums." He laughed, though it came out broken, mixed with a sob he hadn't expected. "Just that David." For the first time in years, tears welled in his eyes. The billionaire facade melted away, and he felt like the boy he had once been, the boy she had lifted when the world had tried to crush him. She stared at him in disbelief, then shook her head slowly, as if trying to reconcile the image of the drenched man before her with the memory of a skinny boy in worn-out sandals. "My God," she murmured. "Look at you, all grown. A man now. I never thought." She stopped herself, the words swallowed by the rain. David glanced at the bread, at the pitiful stall, at the way her hands shook. Rage and sorrow swirled inside him. How could the woman who had shaped so many lives, who had shaped his life, be left to suffer like this? "Madam Grace," he said firmly, his voice trembling with determination. This is not where you belong. Not you. Not after everything you've done." She tried to smile, but it faltered, collapsing under the weight of reality. "Life doesn't always give us what we deserve, David." But David shook his head, rain streaming down his face. "Then life is about to change. Tonight." The storm raged on, but neither of them noticed anymore. For the first time in decades, teacher and student stood face to face, their roles about to be rewritten forever. The rain outside became little more than a whisper as David's mind drifted, pulled back in time, back to the days when Madame Grace wasn't a tired bread seller under the storm, but the commanding presence of his childhood. He was no longer a billionaire standing in Lagos traffic. He was a skinny boy again, barely 13, sitting on a wooden bench in a dusty classroom at St. Michael's Secondary School. The walls were cracked, the chalkboard scarred, and the windows broken, letting in the hot afternoon air. Children chattered noisily, kicking their sandals against the floor, swapping stories about Gary, football, and mischief. Then the sound came. Tap tap tap. The click of Madame Grace's heels against the floorboards. Instant silence. Every head turned as she entered, white chalk in one hand, a tattered notebook in the other. She was not a tall woman, but in that classroom, she seemed to fill every inch of space. Her eyes, sharp and unflinching, swept across the students until even the boldest troublemaker dropped his gaze. "Good afternoon, class." "Good afternoon, Ma." The chorus was loud, almost too loud, the way children try to hide their fear behind enthusiasm. She adjusted her glasses, opened her notebook, and began. "Today we are continuing with mathematics, algebra. I know some of you think numbers are the devil's language. But I will tell you this, if you conquer numbers, you can conquer life." The class groaned softly. A few boys in the back muttered under their breath. But David, little David, sat upright, his eyes fixed on her. It wasn't that he loved mathematics. Far from it. Numbers twisted his head in knots, made his stomach churn. But there was something about the way she spoke, as though math was not just numbers on the board, but a weapon, a shield, a secret path to freedom. "David Martins," she called suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Stand up." His heart pounded. His knees trembled as he rose. "Yes, Ma." "Solve this." She wrote a simple equation on the board. 3x plus 5 is equal to 14. David stared at it. His lips trembled. He could feel the eyes of the whole class on him, waiting for him to fail, waiting for the laughter that always followed. His mind went blank. And then, her voice. "Don't panic, David. What do we always do first?" He swallowed hard, whispering, "Remove the constant, subtract 5. "Good," she said, nodding. "Now what do you have?" 3x equals 9. "And then?" "Divide by 3, x equals 3. A smile broke across her face. A rare, bright smile that lit up the classroom. "Excellent. Sit down." For the first time in months, David felt taller than his classmates. No one laughed. No one mocked. And in that moment, something shifted inside him, the faint flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't doomed to be the poor, forgotten boy everyone expected him to be. But Madame Grace wasn't done. She had a way of seeing straight through a child's soul, of knowing when the world outside the classroom was heavier than the lessons inside it. That day, after class, she called him aside. "David," she said softly, her voice stripped of the strictness it carried in class. "You didn't eat before coming, did you?" He froze. His stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. His face burned with shame. I'm fine, Ma, he muttered. She sighed, reached into her handbag, and pulled out a small packet of groundnuts. Take it. Don't argue. He took it with trembling hands, tears threatening his eyes. You must never let hunger make you believe you are less than others, she said firmly. Hunger is temporary. Knowledge stays forever. Her words sank deep into his bones, carving themselves into his memory. Back in the present, standing in the rain, David blinked away the tears threatening to spill. That voice, the voice of yesterday, was still inside him. And looking at her now, shivering, broken, forgotten by the world, he realized something painful. Everything he had become, every success he had tasted, had started with her. And yet, here she was. Alone. Selling bread. David clenched his fists. This was no coincidence. Destiny had brought him to her again. And this time, he would not fail her. The classroom was hot that afternoon, the kind of stifling heat that made concentration impossible. The ceiling fan above whirred half-heartedly, barely stirring the air. David sat at his wooden desk, his notebook open, his pencil dull. His stomach growled loudly enough for the boy sitting next to him to smirk. Hungry rat, the boy whispered, just loud enough for a few others to hear. A ripple of laughter followed. David kept his head down, pretending to focus on his notebook, but the shame pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. His mother had done her best, stretching the last cup of Gary with water, but it hadn't been enough. Hunger had become his shadow, following him from home to school, gnawing at him every waking moment. That day, the teacher writing on the board wasn't Madam Grace but another staff member, Mr. Okoro, who barely noticed the struggles of his students. When David's stomach growled again, louder this time, Mr. Okoro turned around, chalk in hand. David Martins, he barked. What's the problem? Are you making noise? The class erupted in laughter. He's hungry, sir, someone shouted from the back. He wants fufu. The laughter grew louder. Boys slapped their desks, girls covered their mouths as they giggled. David's face burned. He wanted the ground to open and swallow him. But before Mr. Okoro could say another word, the door opened with a creak. Madam Grace entered. Her eyes scanned the room, and instantly the noise died. Even Mr. Okoro stepped aside, mumbling something about staff duties before slipping out. She walked slowly to the front, her heels clicking, her gaze sweeping across the students until they squirmed in silence. And then she spoke. Who was laughing? No one answered. I asked a question, she said, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. Who was laughing at David? Still silence. Her eyes narrowed. So all of you think it is funny when your classmate is hungry? You sit here mocking him as if any of you bought the lives you're living? A boy at the back tried to stifle a chuckle. Stand up, she snapped. The boy rose reluctantly, his eyes on the floor. You think it's funny? Do you provide your own food at home? Or do you also eat what your parents give you? Today it's David. Tomorrow, it may be you. Poverty is not a crime, but mocking the poor is shameful. The boy mumbled an apology. Madam Grace turned back to the class. Each of you remember this. Hunger can pass, but wickedness of the heart remains. If you laugh at someone's struggle, you're planting a seed you may harvest one day. The classroom fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust on every desk. Then she turned to David. For a moment, her eyes softened. David, stand up. He obeyed slowly, his chest tight. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small wrapped parcel, and placed it on his desk. Take this. And don't you dare feel ashamed. Eat so you can think. Knowledge requires strength. David's lips trembled as he whispered, Thank you, Ma. But her gaze did not leave the rest of the class. Let this be the last time I hear laughter over another's suffering. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Ma. The chorus came, louder than before, tinged with guilt. David sat down, unwrapped the parcel, and found a meat pie inside. The smell alone brought tears to his eyes. He took a bite slowly, feeling the weight of Madame Grace's protection wrap around him like a shield. In that moment, he vowed something silently in his heart. If I ever make it in life, if I ever escape this hunger, I will never forget this woman. Back in the present, standing in the rain with Madame Grace shivering before him, David felt that vow rise again inside him. Louder, stronger, undeniable. This time he would fulfill it. The year David turned 16 was the year everything almost ended. At St. Michael's Secondary School, there was only one thing that mattered more than classes, more than uniforms, more than even the daily roll call: the exam fees. Without them, no student could sit for the WC, the exam that determined whether you would continue your education or fade into the endless cycle of hustling on the streets. The announcement came one Monday morning. The principal stood before the entire school, his voice echoing across the assembly ground. All students must pay their WEC fees within 2 weeks. No payment, no exam. No excuses. David felt the words sink like a stone in his stomach. His family didn't even have money for kerosene to cook most nights. How could they possibly find the thousands required for exam fees? That night, at home, he sat by the dim glow of a kerosene lantern, his exercise book open but his mind far away. His mother watched him, her face weary, her wrapper tied tightly around her thin frame. "David," she said softly, "don't worry. God will provide." But David could see it in her eyes. She didn't know where the money would come from. She was already borrowing food from neighbors, already owing the market woman for rice and beans. The burden of exam fees was like a mountain pressing on her shoulders. As the deadline drew closer, David's classmates whispered about him. Some even mocked him outright. "Forget exams, Martins. You'll soon join us in hawking pure water," one boy sneered. David kept quiet, but inside, despair gnawed at him. He had worked so hard, stayed late to read under lantern light, believed Madame Grace's words that knowledge could change his life. But what use was knowledge if poverty chained him before he could prove it? The day before the deadline, he sat in class, his head on his desk, tears stinging his eyes. He had decided he would not sit the exam. He would drop out quietly. That was when Madame Grace walked in. She noticed him immediately. "David," she said, "come outside." He followed her into the corridor. She studied his face, her eyes narrowing with concern. "What is wrong?" He shook his head. "Nothing, Ma. Don't lie to me. You've been my student for years. I know when something is wrong." The words spilled out before he could stop them. "I can't pay the WEC fees, Ma. My mother has nothing. I'm finished." His voice broke. "Maybe school isn't for me after all." For a long moment, Madame Grace said nothing. She looked away, her jaw tight, her fingers tapping the chalk she always carried. Then, without another word, she reached into her handbag. David watched as she pulled out a small purse, old and faded, and opened it. Inside were only a few naira notes and a pair of gold earrings, the kind that looked well-worn but precious. She took the earrings out and held them in her hand, staring at them for a moment. "These were given to me by my mother," she said quietly. "They are the last valuable thing I own." David's eyes widened. "Ma, no." She silenced him with a firm look. "Education is worth more than gold, David. If you miss this exam, the world will swallow you. I will not allow that." The next day, David learned what she had done. She had sold her earrings at the market, taken the little she had, and paid his exam fees in full. When he found out, he could barely speak. He stood before her in the staff room, his voice trembling. "Why would you do that for me?" She looked at him, her eyes steady. "Because I see in you what you cannot yet see in yourself. You are meant for more. And one day, when you succeed, promise me you will not forget the road you traveled." He nodded, unable to stop the tears. "I promise, Ma. I promise." Back in the present, as the rain poured and Madame Grace stood shivering before him, David remembered that promise like it was yesterday. Her sacrifice had changed the course of his life. Without her, there would have been no billionaire David Martins. And now, seeing her reduced to selling bread by the roadside, he knew with certainty, this was the moment destiny was demanding repayment. Even with exams cleared, life was not easy. David studied under streetlights when there was no kerosene. He worked odd jobs, carrying loads in the market, washing cars, selling newspapers, just to survive. But Madame Grace never stopped checking on him. She visited his mother, brought old textbooks, and encouraged him through every failure. Don't give up, David. The world is bigger than this village. Chase it. Those words became his fuel. Years later, after many rejections, David secured a small scholarship to study abroad. His mother wept the day he boarded the bus. Madame Grace was there too, pressing a small Bible into his hand. "Remember who you are," she said. In America, life was hard. He worked nights at a gas station, cleaned offices, and even slept in libraries. But he studied relentlessly. Eventually, his brilliance caught the attention of investors who backed his first tech idea. That idea grew into a company. That company grew into an empire. David Martins was no longer the hungry boy at the back of the class. He was a billionaire. Years later, David returned home in a convoy of cars. Reporters shouted his name, politicians courted his favor, and communities hailed him as a hero. But amid the noise, he searched quietly for one person, Madame Grace. She was nowhere to be found. Rumors said she had resigned from teaching, that she was struggling, that life had not been kind to her. David vowed he would find her. And now, in the pouring rain, he had. The woman who had once sacrificed her last possession for his future was reduced to selling bread by the roadside, her wrapper soaked, her feet muddy. "Madame Grace," he whispered, his voice breaking, "what happened?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Life happened, David. The government stopped paying salaries. My husband died. I struggled, but here I am." David's chest tightened. How could the world be so cruel to the very person who had changed his life? That night, David could not sleep. Her face haunted him. The next morning, he called his team. "Find me a house. A big one. In her name. Set up a trust fund. She will never hawk bread again." Within days, Madame Grace moved into a furnished home. She wept as David handed her the keys, falling to her knees in gratitude. "No, Ma," he said, lifting her up. "This is not charity. This is a debt long overdue. You gave me a future. Now it's my turn to give you one." The story spread across the nation, how a billionaire repaid the woman who once sold her last earrings for him. People were stunned, humbled, inspired. Months later, Madame Grace sat in the front row of a grand auditorium as David gave a keynote speech. Cameras flashed, investors listened, and the world applauded. But David's eyes searched only for her. "This woman," he told the audience, pointing toward Madame Grace, "is the reason I stand here today. She believed in me when no one else did. She sacrificed everything to give me a chance. If you see greatness in me, know that it was planted by her." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Madame Grace wept openly, her heart full. For David, success was not measured in billions, but in keeping a promise made long ago under the dim glow of a lantern. The story had come full circle. This is not just a story about wealth. It is about gratitude, sacrifice, and the power of one person's belief. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are not found in gold or riches, but in the kindness we give to others.